This really is a joyful time of the year. It's one of my favorite times of the year, the other one being my birthday. But Christmas ranks second below my birthday. No, I'm teasing. But it just is a time to celebrate and to feel good. Maybe that's one way to describe it. Kind of a feel-good time for us, especially the Christian faith, when we celebrate the birthday of our Savior. We celebrate our joy by putting lights on the house and in the tree. We exchange gifts as a sign of our love for each other. We put up our nativity scenes, to remind us of that first story, with the Mary and Joseph looking lovingly on baby Jesus, and then they themselves are surrounded by some shepherds and sheep, angels, donkeys, looking lovingly at the newborn child lying in the manger. We sing Christmas carols that emphasize our joy. Joy to the world, hark the herald angel, O little town of Bethlehem. So Christmas really is a celebration of the good news. The good news that was announced to the angels, the good news that the angels announced to the shepherds and the sheep, and the good news that was made known to the Magi, or the astrologers, or if you want to call them the three kings, who saw the star and followed it to the presence of the Christ child. As wonderful and as joyful a story as Christmas is, if you read it very carefully, you can't help but notice that there is a shadow in the story. Kind of a dark, what would the word be, a thread through all of the gospel. For instance, the child had to be born in a stable because there was no room for them. This is important because Jesus himself will be treated in this way by his own people, who will not have room for him, push him off to the side. That's kind of a shadow hanging over the story. It's not a great environment for a newborn child and mom. And then, of course, we know that one of the three kings brought the gift of myrrh. There's another shadow. What is myrrh used for? What kind of gift is that for a newborn child? Myrrh signifies death. It is used as an oil to anoint the bodies of the dead. Here's another shadow hanging over the story. Then we hear when King Herod met the Magi and they said, "Where's the newborn king of the Jews?" We're told he became troubled. And all of Jerusalem was troubled with this news. Why? Because they did not want to have any kind of threat from another king. Herod told the Magi, "Go worship the child and come back and tell me where he is so I could go worship him too." But we know what was really in Herod's heart. He wanted to kill the Christ child. So we know this from the scriptures. We're told that when the Magi went home by another route, Herod was infuriated. Here's what the scriptures say if we were to read further. When Herod realized he had been deceived by the Magi, he became furious. He ordered the massacre of all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity, 2 years old and under. Then was fulfilled what had been said through Jeremiah the prophet. A voice was heard in Ramah, sobbing and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children, and she could not be consoled, since they were no more. Herod was known historically to be a cruel man. He was a puppet king set up by Rome. He was so paranoid that he killed his wife and 2 sons because he thought they were threatening his throne. No wonder he feared this news about the birth of another king. So this account refers to what we call the Massacre of the Holy Innocents. And it's on the church calendar on December 28th. Isn't that kind of a sad thing? We just celebrate the birthday of Christ, the most joyful day of the year, and then 3 days later, we're remembering the slaughter of innocents. Those who had to pay the price because of Herod's fear and lust for power. And then the story goes on and tells us that because of this threat to the Christ child, Joseph and Mary and the infant had to get up and flee to another country. Here's the shadow again. They remained there beyond Herod's reach, and they did not return home until Herod had died. So when you think about it and you look at the details of the story of Christmas, it's like the cross is always present. Even for Jesus in his infancy, the threat of violence, the threat of evil is always present in the story. And isn't that our story as well? You know, in spite of the joy and the celebration and the merriment that we have at Christmas, there is a shadow that hangs over our human family. Think about it. When the time came for us to be born, or our children or grandchildren, we were probably able to access a hospital where birth occurred. You probably had doctors and nurses present to assist us in case anything went wrong. If there were some complications, then you'd receive the best care to ensure the health of a child. Then, if not the same day, we returned to the comfort of our own homes. Our parents sheltered us, fed us, clothed us, protected us, cared for our every need. And as a result, we were all able to grow up and prosper and become healthy men and women. So for the great majority of us, the circumstances of our birth were far better than the circumstances of Jesus' birth. But that's just us. You know, if you live in the United States or in the Western Hemisphere, you are all but guaranteed to come into the world without much difficulty. But what if you live somewhere else, even today? Chances are, even today, we could have come into the world under very different circumstances. Consider this. If you're born in the US or Canada or Western Europe, you have a better chance of surviving your first year of life as opposed to children who were born elsewhere. The infant mortality rate in the United States is anywhere between like 1 in 5. That's maybe what that means is between 1 and 5 children will not survive the first year of life out of a group of 1,000 live births. 1 in 5. But if you're born in Mexico, the mortality rate is 18, 3 times as much. If you're born in India, the mortality rate is 41 deaths per 1,000 live births. And if you're born in Afghanistan today, the mortality rate is 110 deaths per 1,000 live births. In parts of our world, there are still children who do not live beyond their first few years because of war, hunger, disease, lack of medical care. These are the primary reasons. You know, the birth of a child should be an occasion of joy and hope. But for many people in our world, it carries a heavy burden with it. We have to also consider the fact that in our society, the life of children is made difficult by abortion. We don't like to talk about this too much. But you know, in our country, nearly 1 out of 4 unplanned pregnancies end in abortion. That's about 3,000 pregnancies terminated every day. Again, we don't like to think about that truth, but it is a truth. And it's a painful reminder that even in the 21st century, unborn children have this threat hanging over them, that perhaps their parents will deny them the right to be born. Another threat to the life of children comes from millions having to leave their homes because of the threat of war, starvation, disease. You know, the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph faced the challenge of having to leave Bethlehem because this crazy king was trying to kill the child. And they were able to find refuge in Egypt, which is a traditional enemy of Israel. But they were able to find shelter and refuge there until the danger had passed. Today it's estimated that 30 million people are classified as refugees. Half are children. Yet the wealthiest nations, including our own, are enacting policies to refuse refugees from seeking shelter. And nearly 1/3 of these refugees are being accepted by poor nations who don't have the resources to provide for them in the first place. Again, 2,000 years ago, the Holy Family had a better chance of finding shelter in another country than today's refugees are. What does that say about the state of our world and the way we treat people and children? Now, I know this is kind of a downer homily. I was thinking that when I was writing it, actually. You don't want to hear this during the season of Christmas. But we need to be reinforced by the sad fact that there's not a lot of joy and happiness for many children and families in our contemporary world, even while we're celebrating Christmas. That is not the way God intended things to be. What we learn from the Christmas story is that God put his Son in a human family for a reason, because that was the best environment for the child to grow and prosper and learn about life. Jesus, he could have come to us as an angel or a spirit without the need for a mother or father or home or education or food. But God chose otherwise. It was part of God's plan to have his own Son experience the goodness and the totality of family life. He gave Jesus a mother who nurtured and loved him. He gave Jesus a foster father, a guardian, to protect him, to teach him. Both Mary and Joseph, in their marriage, worked together to face the challenges of family life. They were always open to God's plan, and as a result of their cooperation with God, they thrived, and they succeeded in raising Jesus so he could make the successful transition into adulthood and begin his work of our salvation. So when we look at what God did for his own Son to nurture and protect him, we are reminded of how we are responsible to make children today safe and supported and loved and protected. It's our responsibility to make certain that children have everything at their disposal so that they can be healthy and fulfilled in life. Like the angels who announced the birth of Jesus, we are the angels who have to advocate on behalf of children everywhere. We should become angels who sound the alarm when children are threatened. We need to be the angels of good news who make sure that medical help is available to all children. We need to be angels of mercy who will come to the rescue of children, to give them hope, maybe those who are homeless or separated from their families or who live in war zones. Like the shepherds who looked on in amazement at the Christ child, we're to be like shepherds who stand in awe of the gift of life, who surround children with love and protection that they need. And like the Magi who brought their gifts to the Christ child, we are to gift our children and the children of the world with what they need to secure their dignity and their well-being. So this new year, with the help of the God who gave us life, maybe this can be a priority for us. God gives life to every child. God knows the pain of children around the world who are neglected. And I dare say God grieves the death of these little ones. So we could be the ones giving warning and protection, rescue and care. We can be the light that shines on the situation of children in our society, in our world. We could lift our children right out of evil's path, just as Jesus was lifted out of the path of King Herod. Maybe that's our commitment this year. With God's help, it can happen.